Getting Away with Murder, The True Story of the Emmett Till Case, Chapter 2, Kicking the Hornet's Nest. Emmett Till never planned to be the catalyst for the civil rights movement. As a 14-year-old boy, it's likely he was more interested in sports, girls, and having fun than in the struggles of African Americans for equal treatment. For Emmett Till and other African Americans living in Chicago, life was markedly better than it was in the South. Segregation still existed, of course, but the nearly 500,000 African Americans in Chicago had many more opportunities and much more freedom than their Southern counterparts. Well-paying jobs were in good supply. Many churches, newspapers, and businesses catered exclusively to black customers. Racial violence was relatively rare. In general, the quality of life, housing, education, employment, entertainment, and social opportunities was significantly better for African Americans and whites in Chicago than it was in most southern cities. While it is certain that Emmett knew about segregation, he attended McCosh Elementary School, an all-black school, and lived in a segregated neighborhood. His life in Chicago was a good one. He had many friends, was well known and liked by his neighbors, and lived in a comfortable 6-room apartment with his mother, Mamie Till Bradley. He may have heard about some of the racial trouble in Mississippi and other southern states, and in May 1954 probably also learned about the Supreme Court decision that declared school segregation illegal, but these events had little direct impact on him, and as a young teenager who had just finished 7th grade, he probably didn't pay much attention to national politics. But racist whites in Mississippi and other southern states did pay attention to the Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education ruling in 1954, and the reactions were swift and angry. U.S. Congressman John Bell Williams of Mississippi immediately labeled the day of the announcement Black Monday. He accused the Supreme Court of attempting to destroy the Southern way of life and vowed to do whatever he could to resist desegregation. James O. Eastland, U.S. Senator from Mississippi, said, on May 17, 1954, the Constitution of the United States was destroyed because of the Supreme Court's decision. You are not obligated to obey the decisions of any court which are plainly fraudulent. In anticipation of the Supreme Court's decision, some southern states had already voted to suspend their public education requirement laws in order to avoid using the state money to educate African Americans. Actions to block integration took place outside the government as well. In Indianola, Mississippi, Robert Tutt Patterson formed the White Citizens Council, a white-collar version of the Ku Klux Klan, to use politics and economic pressure to combat integration in the South. The council quickly spread to other southern states. In Greenwood, Mississippi, Judge Tom P. Brady delivered a passionate speech to white segregationists that decried the Supreme Court's ruling, emphasized the inferiority of the African race, and predicted the destruction of the South if integration were allowed to happen. Brady's speech was so popular that in July 1954 he expanded it and published it as a book, Black Monday, Segregation or America Has Its Choice. Widely distributed by white citizen councils, Brady's book was read by whites who feared integration, and for them it became an authoritative text that they could cite when arguing against the Supreme Court's decision. Brady's book included a chilling prediction. After a lengthy description of how integration was a communist socialist plot to destroy America and how the mixing of races would ruin our nation, Brady unknowingly foreshadowed the racist rationale for murdering Emmett Till 13 months before his death. The fulminant which will discharge the blast will be the young Negro schoolboy or veteran who has no conception of the difference between a mark and a fathom. The supercilious, glib young Negro who has sojourned in Chicago or New York and who considers the counsel of his elders archaic will perform an obscene act or make an obscene remark or a vile overture or assault upon some white girl. This warning from Brady put segregationists in Mississippi on the lookout for smart-talking black boys from northern cities who would soon come to the South to harass white women and ultimately destroy segregation and the Southern way of life. Brady also argued that school integration was a communist-inspired plot that would lead directly to what white supremacists feared most, the end of the separation of the black and white races. You cannot place little white and Negro children together in classrooms and not have integration. They will sing together, dance together, eat together, and play together. They will grow up together, and the sensitivity of the white children will be dulled. This is the way it has worked in the North. This is the way the NAACP wants it to work out in the South, and that is what Russia wants. Many readers believed every word of Brady's inflammatory book and became increasingly worried about the negative effects of the Brown versus Board of Education decision would have on their lives and their society. Like Black Monday, other speeches, newspaper editorials, public meetings, and books condemning desegregation stirred up fear and hatred in many white Southerners. Convinced that the government was going to destroy their way of life, white supremacists in the South pledged to do everything they could to stop the integration of schools before it began. In an article for the Saturday Evening Post, Harding Harder, editor of a well-known Mississippi newspaper, described the stubborn attitude of the people of Mississippi and their futility of the Supreme Court's effort to hasten integration. Ours is a besieged state, but one not inclined to surrender. No one should expect that a decision of the Supreme Court can soon or conclusively change a whole people's thinking. Many white Mississippians felt that their state was under attack by the U.S. government and the NAACP, and they were prepared to defend their segregated society. On May 31, 1955, almost 3 months before Emmett Till boarded a train for Money, Mississippi, the political and emotional fireworks that were ignited by the 1954 integration ruling interrupted in a volcano of racial hatred and anger in southern states when the Supreme Court mandated the desegregation of the nation's schools should proceed with all deliberate speed. Alarmed citizens immediately mobilized, politically, economically, and violently, to prevent their white schools from becoming integrated. An anti-integration protest continued with new intensity, encouraged by the White Citizens Council and other racist groups. The Jim Crow laws that had prevented African Americans from registering to vote intensified all across the South, making it virtually impossible for black citizens to vote. Some countries had black populations of more than 60% without any black registered voters. Businesses owned by politically active black Southerners were forced to shut down because banks foreclosed mortgages, wholesalers refused to provide goods, or property owners terminated leases. Unfortunately, violence against African Americans also increased. On August 13, 1955, 2 weeks before Emmett Till was kidnapped, Lamar Smith, a black voter registration activist, was shot and killed in broad daylight on the courthouse lawn in Brookhaven, Mississippi. Though the city square and courthouse lawn were crowded with people when Smith was shot, no witnesses came forward to testify against the killer, and no one was ever convicted of the crime. Other acts of violence and intimidation occurred throughout the South, and many whites considered Smith's murder and other racist crimes justified action in their war against forced integration. An editorial in the Jackson Clarion Ledger defending the South from the Northern condemnation of the increased violence against black people is a good example of racist attitudes held by many whites in Mississippi at the time. Just let a couple of Southerners whip a colored person or let a Negro get himself killed under unusual circumstances, and every pressure group in the land prominently howls for FBI action, plus rigid laws that would destroy our basic liberties. Emmett Till knew nothing of the dangerous, intense climates in Mississippi that he and his cousin would enter on August 21, 1955. To make matters worse, as a boy raised in Chicago, he did not understand anything about racial attitudes of white Mississippians or the politics and taboos established by Jim Crow laws. Emmett's mother, born and raised in Mississippi, tried her best to prepare him for what he would encounter in her home state. Emmett was born and raised in Chicago, so he didn't know how to be humble to white people. I warned him before he came down here. I told him to be very careful how he spoke and say yes, sir, and no, ma'am, and not to hesitate to humble himself if he had to get down on his knees. I was trying to really pound it into him that Mississippi was not Chicago. I explained to Emmett that if he met a white woman, he should step off the street, lower his head, and not look up. And he thought that was the silliest thing he'd ever heard. Sadly, Emmett Till's lack of experience with Southern customs and his unwillingness to follow his mother's advice and the brashness and sense of invincibility that many 14-year-old boys possess led him to violate one of the South's most fiercely protected taboos at a time when racial tensions were primed to explode. His cocky and naive indiscretion in Muncie, Mississippi, on the night of August 24, 1955, inflamed the hatred of two local white men who believed every word of Tom Brady's Black Monday and all other racist rhetoric that had circulated in Mississippi since the Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education decision. They'd been waiting for the trouble, for a glib young Negro from Chicago or New York to step out of line. And when he did, they made sure to make an example out of him, an example that no one would forget.